friends, Romans, breakfast pastries. Good to see ya. And I'm here. Y'all can let me know if everything is working the way it seems like it should be working, or if my mouth is moving, but you're not hearing anything or whatever. But I think we straightened that out last time. Anyway, so hello. Good to see you. Oh my God, it's been a crazy month. And I'm not even including the full month when I was taking sabbatical. I'm just referring to the last month, which has been utterly crazy. Not really a lot of details to tell. But suffice it to say, everybody's well. Nobody on this end anyway. I mean, obviously all over the world, people are dying like flies. But no, I mean, in terms of my household and friends and relations and all that stuff, as far as I know, everybody's fine. Fingers crossed. So nothing like that has been going on. Just a lot of stuff. Anyway, but during all that time, as probably most of those of you who are actually hanging out are aware, Into the Narrow Dark came out, which is a good thing. And the yeah, I mean, that's exciting in and of itself. I'm also really moving forward on the ending of Navigator's Children now, which after a very long stretch, which I think I explained the last time we were all together, very long stretch of doing very weird, complicated mixing, matching, trying to get timelines to sync up while moving whole bits away or taking whole bits out or writing whole new bits and plugging them in. I'm back now to just writing to the end of the book, first draft, but like actual writing, which is so much more satisfying. I can't even explain it. Well, actually, I can explain it. I can explain it very coherently. It's so much more satisfying because when you spend the entire day editing and thinking, at the end of the day, you've been working all day, but you can't really prove it to yourself. You know you have been, but you can't really prove it. Whereas when you're writing actual new material, like first draft, writing the story, it's wonderful because it's like you start on page 657 and you finish up on page 675 or 665 or whatever. And you can go, look, I wrote 8 damn pages today. I did work. Work happened. And at least for me, that means I can go like watch something stupid on TV or read something or go annoy the dogs and feel justified. Feel like I've done my bit. I've earned this time abusing my pets, the leisure time, the joy that it brings to me. Anyway, so what else is there to talk? I mean, there's just been a lot of craziness. There's just stuff going on. The news is horrendous. The war in Ukraine is still going on and is still utterly horrifying. And the state of the country politically is still going on and still utterly horrifying. But as I said, I try to avoid those kinds of things because that's not really what these particular broadcasts were. For those of you who've only joined me in the last year or so, this started actually with the pandemic. And I was sort of sitting around thinking, everybody's stuck in the house and nobody's enjoying it very much. And, it's like, what can I do? And the only thing I could think of, the kind of thing that I find soothing and which was a major part of what made me who I am as a person, was being read to when I was young. And I always thought, yeah, there's something kind of satisfying about that. It's a nice thing to be read to, and it's something I can do. And considering I have this backlog of stories I've written over the years and stuff, I can read without having to worry about violating somebody else's copyright, because as a person who makes his living off of his words, I don't want to take anybody else's work unfairly, but I also don't want to be doing something that's costing me money. I've had that experience before. That's what writing Shadow March online was like. It was great fun, and we made some friends during that process that are still friends, and people who helped us put together the website who are still super important to us. And all kinds of good things came out of Shadow March. But as an economic experiment, it was an utter disaster, which is why I also wrote The War of the Flowers that year, that I was writing the first Shadow March novel online. I've explained this before to many people, but and I don't mean to rehash old material, but so anyway, but it did occur to me that if I had to pay out some kind of intellectual property payment or something to read other people's stories, I was either going to have to read only public domain, or I could just read my own stuff. So that's what I decided to do. So I still haven't figured out what I want to do long term with this whole online thing. I do want to hang on to it. I like the connection. People seem to enjoy it. This is not a permanent solution yet. I've been too busy with the book. I really started to think about what I wanted to do next, and I have some distinct ideas. But they will require some preparation, some setting up, some writing of things ahead of time, and, just work. And at the moment, all my spare time is going into domestic stuff and, of course, finishing Navigator's Children, after which I have several other projects also lined up. So for now, just at the moment, I'm just going to read, and that's going to be my current plan. Just for a while till I figure out what I'm doing next. So because of that, I was thinking, well, what haven't I read from? I read Tail Chaser's Song, and I read my shorter novels, Child of an Ancient City, Caliban's Hour. I read several other things, read a ton of short stories, and read the first Shadow March. And I realized, well, if I'm reading the first volume of things, I could read The Witchwood Crown. And then I suddenly went, well, hang on a second. I haven't read the first volume of the first Ostenard series, which is the Dragonbone Share. This one with this wonderful, now somewhat iconic cover by Michael Whalen. And so that might be a good thing to read. So that's where I'm at the moment. Just, wanting to keep it going. And when I have some time, I'll be able to have more thoughts about. I really thought when I was taking, what I kept calling my sabbatical, when I took off quite several weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, that I would have time to think on it. And instead, it just happened to be a time where everything went kablooey all at the same time. All these domestic issues and just stuff. It's been crazy. But anyway, and business stuff, my publishers had changed their corporate sponsors, which has been a huge thing, which has affected everything, but I couldn't talk about it until just recently. So if you're interested, you can go look up the details. But Daw Books, whom I have been with as my American publishers since forever, because they were the first people who ever gave me a contract, changed their corporate umbrella and moved to a different publishing company because they are themselves a separate entity. So that's had a huge effect on me because they're my first line publishers. They're my editors. They're very important to how I work. And we couldn't go forward with anything for the last couple of years. So that was very complicated. But, and that all just finally got resolved within the last month where it could be talked about. But there have been a bazillion other things like, house issues, massive plumbing collapse, and all kinds of stuff. It's been really interesting. Johnny escaping. We're spending a lot of money to rebuild the fence. If somebody will ever call us back with an estimate, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just, it goes on. And our daughter, who is currently up in Northern California, for various reasons, including finding a place to live, while she and her partner are doing school and working up there. She said the other day, because her what was it called? The air fryer in the Airbnb, they're actually not permanently settled in, so they're in an Airbnb at the moment, and her air fryer was setting off the Airbnb smoke alarms, and we got this text that just said, adulting is really hard. And, that the last thing they want you to tell is like, do you think it's bad now? You think it's bad now? Oh my God, just wait till you have a house and kids and a dog and dogs and cats and rabbits and guinea pigs, and sure as you're born, don't you forget my unicorn, to quote an old song. Anyway, so that's my last month has been like that. So because of that, I haven't had a chance to think through any of this stuff. I haven't had a chance to properly work on it. It took me a week and a half just to sit down and find the time to draw a map of the part of the story that I'm working on now. Oh, great. My camera's just frozen up again. I'm going to assume that you guys can still see me unless I hear otherwise. I don't know why this stupid thing does this. It just sometimes freezes for no good reason. Anyway, I don't care because I don't need to see me anyway. It's not something that I look forward to particularly. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to say hello to the people who have checked in, and then I am going to start reading. So it's only a few moments till reading. If you will just put up with me scrolling down the chat bar. And first off the bat is Olaf. Hello, Olaf. Good to see you. And your little yellow smiling face. I know it's an emoticon. It's an emoji. I know. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Ronnie, hello. Good morning. Cliff. Hello, family as well. And I hope yours is also very much so. Rosalba, good morning. Ron, hello, buddy. Good to see you. It's still going to be a couple of more weeks before I get you guys at least a couple more weeks before I get you guys a first draft. It's going to be probably more like a month and a half or something. But anyway, good to see you. Hello. Maria Jose, good to see you too. Hello, Mark. Good morning. Who else here? Wouter, hello. Michiel, good to see you too. Michiel is here, and I already said hello to Wouter. And Ilva. Oh, good. I'm so glad to see you here. I hope you saw the message I left you. It's complete chaos around here, and I left you an apologetic message where you wrote on my Facebook page, which should be elsewhere on wherever you're viewing this. Same page. Anyway, so good to see you. We will talk soon, and I'm very glad to hear you're feeling better. Super glad. And if Deb hadn't fallen asleep tonight, we probably would have been talking. Iris, good morning. Good to see you. And Olaf, about the sale of DAW. I think I've mentioned that. I don't really know that much about the new company, except obviously they want to work with DAW. So DAW is my American publishers, for those of you who missed the earlier part of that explanation. So I hope things go well. I'm going to certainly assume that they will, because they made a positive move to say we want to be DAW's publishers. And that's a good thing. So who else is here? Holger, hello. Good to see you. Kristen, good to see you too. And who else? Winter, hello, Winter. Good to see you. I've been thinking about you because there's been a lot of New Zealand news lately. Jessica, hello, Jessica. How are you? Who else have we got? Jeremy was a detective in dinner theater tonight. The only time I ever did a dinner theater murder mystery. You're looking at Monsieur Poirot here. You're looking at Miss Marple. You're looking at Rex Stout. No, Rex Stout wrote the books. Rex Stout wrote the book. Sorry. And Archie was the one who ran. Nero Wolfe. You're looking at Nero Wolfe here. I was the only person who got the mystery right. Not really anything to be that proud about when you're somebody who writes these things for a living. Anyway, who else is still here that I haven't said hello to? There is my mother-in-law. Hello, Hazel. Good to see you, sweetie. I can't see my face, which is good for me, but you can see mine. So see me waving. Hello, good to see you. Who else? Sally. Okay, good to see you. And Sally can see me because that's what she wrote in her chat here, or in the, it says chat. Who have we got? All right, everybody can see me. Ulf, hello, good to see you. Nikki, hello, good to see you. And Chris. Oh, you guys all just came in at the end there. A pleasure to have you all with me. Okay, so now without further ado, I am going to start reading from the Dragonbone chair. which was the first extremely long book written by this Williams guy. Because I wrote Tail Chaser's Song. It was also the first Williams book ever to have any editing, as I mentioned during, I think, the reading of Tail Chaser's Song. It was the last book that Don Walheim bought. But then he became ill and pretty much had to turn over the company to his daughter, Betsy Walheim, and her business partner, Sheila Gilbert. And at that point, although Don was still around for several years, and I did get a lot of chances to get to know him and Elsie, his wife, who was a sweetie. Don, had bought the book, but he didn't edit it, and he just kind of sent it on in to be published as it was in the manuscript. So this was the first book I ever got any active editing on. And as we go through it, I won't start it now. I won't start just talking about it now because I have to read some stuff. Oh, God, I wonder if I should read the introduction to the new edition. Maybe I'll read that later. Anyway, so I do have some things to say about the editing process because it really did, I think, in a lot of ways, add a lot, and particularly one thing, which I will mention at some point. I think I've said it in the past, so it's not like it's a big secret. Anyway, so the Dragonbone chair. And I'm just going to go through all this front matter, except I'm going to avoid the introduction to the new edition, because it's about 3 pages long. This book is dedicated to my mother, Barbara Jean Evans, who taught me a deep affection for Toad Hall, the 100-acre woods, the Shire, and many other hidden places and countries beyond the fields we know. She also induced in me a lifelong desire to make my own discoveries and to share them with others. I wish to share this book with her. And author's warning. Wanderers in the land of Ostenard are cautioned not to put blind trust in old rules and forms, and to observe all rituals with a careful eye, for they often mask being with seeming. The Canuck folk of the snow-mantled Trollfells have a proverb. He who is certain he knows the ending of things, when he is only beginning, is either extremely wise or extremely foolish. No matter which is true, he is certainly an unhappy man, for he has put a knife in the heart of wonder. More bluntly, new visitors to this land should take heed. Avoid assumptions. The Canuck have another saying. Welcome, stranger. The paths are treacherous today. Forward. The book of the mad priest Nisses is large, say those who have held it, and as heavy as a small child. It was discovered at Nisses' side as he lay, dead and smiling, beside the tower window from which his master, King Yeldon, had leaped to his own death moments before. The rusty brown ink, concocted of lamb's foil, hellebore, and rue, as well as some redder, thicker liquid, is dry and flakes easily from the thin pages. The unadorned skin of a hairless animal, the species unprovable, forms the binding. Those holy men of Naban who read it after Nisses' passing pronounced it heretical and dangerous, but for some reason did not burn it, as is usually done with such texts. Instead, it lay for many years in Mother Church's near endless archives in the deepest, most secret vaults of the Sancellan Adenitis. It has now apparently disappeared from the onyx casket which housed it. The never gregarious order of the archives is vague as to its present whereabouts. Some who have read Nisses' heretical work claim that it contains all the secrets of Ostenard, from this land's murky past to the shadows of things unborn. The Adenite priest-examiners will say only that its subject matter was unholy. It may indeed be true that Nisses' writings predict the what will be as clearly and, we may presume, eccentrically as they chronicle the what has been. It is not known, however, whether the great deeds of our age, especially for our concern, the rise and triumph of Prester John, are included in the priest's foretellings, although there are suggestions that this may be true. Much of Nisi's writing is mysterious, its meaning hidden in strange rhymes and obscure references. I have never read the full work, and most of those who have are now long dead. The book is titled, in the cold, harsh runes of Nisi's northern birthplace, Du Svardenverd, which means the weird of the swords. And that is an excerpt from The Life and Reign of King John Presbyter by Morgenis Ursestres. Part 1, Simon Mooncalf. Chapter 1, The Grasshopper and the King. On this day of days, there was an unfamiliar stirring deep inside the dozing heart of the Hayholt, in the castle's bewildering warren of quiet passages and overgrown ivy-choked courtyards, in the monks' holes and damp-shadowed chambers. Courtiers and servants alike goggled and whispered. Scullions exchanged significant glances across the washing tubs in the steamy kitchen. Hushed conversations seemed to be taking place in every hallway and dooryard of the great keep. It might have been the first day of spring, to judge from the air of breathless anticipation, but the great calendar and Dr. Morgenis's cluttered chamber showed differently. The month was only November. Autumn was holding the door, and winter was trudging in. What made this a day different from all others was not a season, but a place, the Hayholt's throne room. For 3 long years its doors had been shut by the king's order, and heavy draperies had cloaked the multicolored windows. Even the cleaning servants had not been permitted to cross the threshold, causing the mistress of chambermaids no end of personal anguish. 3 summers and 3 winters it had stood undisturbed. Today it was no longer empty, and all the castle hummed with rumor. In truth, there was one person in the busy Hayholt whose attention was not fixed on that long untenanted room, one bee in the murmuring hive whose solitary song was not in key with the greater droning. That one sat in the heart of the hedge garden, in an alcove between the dull red stone of the chapel and the leafless side of a skeletal hedge lion, and thought he was not missed. It had been an irritating day so far, the women all busy with scant time to answer questions, breakfast late and cold into the bargain. Confusing orders had been given to him, as usual, and no one had any time to waste with any of his problems. And that was also, he thought grumpily, quite predictable. If it hadn't been for his discovery of this huge, magnificent beetle, which had come strolling across the garden as self-satisfied as any prosperous villager, then the entire afternoon would have been a waste of time. With a twig, he widened the tiny road he had scraped in the dark, cold earth beside the wall. But still the captive would not walk forward. He tickled gently at its glossy carapace, but the stubborn beetle would not budge. Frowning, he sucked at his upper lip. "Simon, where in the name of holy creation have you been?" The twig dropped from his nerveless fingers as though an arrow had pierced his heart. Slowly he turned to look at the looming shape. "Nowhere," Simon began to say, but even as the words passed his lips, a pair of bony fingers caught his ear and brought him sharply to his feet, yelping in pain. "Don't you dare nowhere me, young layabout!" Rachel the dragon, mistress of chambermaids, barked full into his face, a juxtaposition made possible only by Rachel's tiptoed stance and the boy's natural inclination to slouch, for the head chambermaid lacked nearly a foot of Simon's height. "Sorry, then, mistress. I'm sorry," Simon muttered, noting with sadness the beetle nosing toward a crack in the chapel wall and freedom. "Sorry is not going to get you by forever." Rachel growled. "Every single body in the house is at work at getting things ready but you. And bad enough that is, but then I have to waste my valuable time trying to find you. How can you be such a wicked boy, Simon, when you should be acting like a man? How can you?" The boy, 14, gangly years old and furiously embarrassed, said nothing. Rachel stared at him. Sad enough, she thought, that red hair and those spots. But when he squints his eyes up that way and he scowls, why, the child, what? He looks half-witted. Simon, staring in turn at his captor, saw Rachel breathing heavily, pluming the Novander air with puffs of vapor. She was shivering, too, although whether from the cold or anger Simon couldn't tell. It didn't really matter. It just made him feel worse. She's still waiting for an answer. How tired and cross she looks. He curled himself into an even more pronounced slump and glared at his own feet. Well, you just come with me, then. The good Lord knows I've got things to keep an idle boy busy with. Don't you know the king is up out of his sickbed? That he's gone to his throne room today? Are you deaf and blind? She grabbed his elbow and frog-marched him across the garden. The king? King John? Simon asked, surprised. No, you ignorant boy, King Stone in the Road. Of course, King John. Rachel halted in her tracks to push a wisp of limp steel-gray hair back under her bonnet. Her hand trembled. There, I hope you're happy, she said. You've gotten me so flummoxed and upset that I've gone and been disrespectful to the name of our good old King John, and him so sick and all. She snuffled loudly and then leaned over to deal Simon a stinging slap on the fat part of his arm. Just you come. She stumped forward, wicked boy in tow. Simon had never known any other home but the ageless castle called Hayhold, which meant High Keep. It was well named. Green Angel Tower, its loftiest point, soared far above even the eldest and tallest of trees. If the angel herself, perched on the tower top, had dropped a stone from her verdigrised hand, it would have plummeted nearly 200 cubits before splashing into the brackish mud and troubling the sleep of the great pikefish bobbing close above the centuried mud. The Hayholt was older by far than all the generations of Erkenlandish peasants who had been born, labored, and died in the fields and villages surrounding the great keep. The Erkenlanders were the latest to claim the castle. Many others had called it their own, but none had been able to make it wholly so. The outwall around the sprawling keep showed the work of diverse hands and times. The rough-hewn rock and timber of the rimmersmen, the haphazard patching and strange carvings of the Hernestiri, even the meticulous stonework of Nabanai craftsmen. But looming over all stood Green Angel Tower, erected by the undying Scythi, long before men had come to these lands, and all of Ostenard had been their dominion. The Scythi had been the first to build here, constructing their primeval stronghold on the headlands overlooking the Kinslaw and the river road to the sea. They had called their castle Azwa. If it had a true name, this house of many masters, then Azwa was that name. The fair folk had vanished now from the grassy plains and rolling hill country, fled mostly to the woods and craggy mountains and other dark places inconvenient to men. The bones of their castle, a home to usurpers, remained behind. Azua, the paradox, proud yet ramshackle, festive and forbidding, seemingly oblivious to changes of tenantry. Azua, the Hayholt. It bulked mountainously above the outlands and town, hunched over its fief like a sleeping honey-muzzled bear among her cubs. It often seemed that Simon was the only dweller in the great castle who had not settled into his place in life. The masons plastered the whitewashed
facing of the residents and shored up the castle's crumbling walls, although the crumbling did sometimes seem to outpace the restorations. With never a thought toward how the world spun or why, the pantlers and butlers whistling merrily rolled huge casks of sack and salted beef here and there. With the castle seneschal beside them, they haggled with farmers over the whiskery onions and soil-moist carrots brought in sacks to the Hayholt's kitchens every morning. And Rachel and her chambermaids were always excruciatingly busy, flourishing their brooms of bound straw, chasing dust balls as if herding skittish sheep, muttering pious imprecations about the way some people left a chamber when they departed, and generally terrorizing the slothful and slovenly. In the midst of such industry, gawky Simon was the fabled grasshopper in the nest of ants. He knew he would never amount to much. Many people had told him so, and nearly all of them were older and presumably wiser than he. At an age when other boys were clamoring for the responsibilities of manhood, Simon was still a muddler and a meanderer. No matter what task he was given to do, his attention soon wandered, and he would be dreaming of battles and giants and sea voyages on tall, shining ships, and somehow things would get broken or lost or done wrong. Other times he could not be found at all. He skulked around the castle like a scrawny shadow, could shinny up a wall as well as the roof masons and glaziers, and knew so many passageways and hiding holes that the castle folk called him Ghost Boy. Rachel boxed his ears frequently and called him a mooncalf. Rachel had finally let go of his arm, and Simon dragged his feet glumly as he followed the mistress of chambermaids like a stick caught in a skirt hem. He had been discovered. His beetle had escaped, and the afternoon was ruined. "What must I do, Rachel?" he mumbled unpleasantly. "Help in the kitchen?" Rachel snorted disdainfully and waddled on, a badger in an apron. Simon looked back regretfully on the sheltering trees and hedges of the garden. Their commingled footfalls resounded solemnly down the long stone hallway. He had been raised by the chambermaids, but since he was certainly never going to be one himself, his boyness aside, Simon was obviously not to be trusted with delicate domestic operations. A concerted effort had been made to find suitable labors for him. In a great house, and the Hayholt was doubtless the greatest, there was no place for those who did not work. He found employment of a sort in the castle kitchens, but even at this undemanding job he was not completely successful. The other scullions would laugh and nudge each other to see Simon, elbow deep in hot water, eyes squinted shut in oblivious reverie, learning the trick of bird flight or saving dream maidens from imaginary beasts as his scrubbing stick floated off across the washing vat. Legend had it that Sir Fluiren, a relative of the famous Sir Camerus of Naban, had in his youth come to the Hayholt to be a knight, and had worked a year in disguise in the same scullery, due to his ineffable humility. The kitchen workers had teased him, or so the story went, calling him pretty hands, because the terrible toil did not diminish the fine whiteness of his fingers. Simon had only to look at his own cracked nail, pink boiled paws to know that he was no great lord's orphan son. He was a scullion and a corner sweeper, and that was that. At a not much greater age, everyone knew King John had slain the red dragon. Simon wrestled with brooms and pots. Not that it made much difference. It was a different, quieter world than in John's youth, thanks largely to the old king himself. No dragons, living ones anyway, inhabited the dark, endless halls of the Hayholt. But Rachel, as Simon often cursed to himself, with her sour face and terrible tweezing fingers, was near enough. They had reached the antechamber before the throne room, the center of the inordinate activity. The chambermaids, moving at a near run, careened from wall to wall like flies in a bottle. Rachel stood with fists set on hips and surveyed her domain, seeming, from the smile that tightened her thin mouth, to find it good. Simon lurked against a tapestried wall, forgotten for a moment. Slouching, he stared from the corner of his eyes at the new girl, Hepzibah, who was plump and curly-haired and walked with an insolent sway. Passing by with a slashing bucket of water, she caught his glance and smiled widely, amused. Simon felt fire crackling up his neck and into his cheeks, and turned to pick at the tattered wall hanging. Rachel had not missed the exchange of looks. "Lord whip you for a donkey, boy. Didn't I tell you to get to work? Have at it, then." "At what? Do what?" Simon shouted, and was mortified to hear Hepzibah's silvery giggle float out from the hallway. He pinched his own arm in frustration. It hurt. "Take this broom and go sweep out the doctor's chambers. That man lives like a pack rat, and who knows where the king will want to go now that he's up." It was clear from her tone that Rachel found the general contrariness of men to be undiminished by kingship. "Dr. Morgani's chambers?" Simon asked. For the first time since he had been discovered in the garden, his spirits rose. "I'll do it straight away." He snatched the broom at a dead run and was gone. Rachel snorted and turned back to examine the spotless perfection of the antechamber. She briefly wondered what could possibly be going on behind the great throne room door, then dismissed the errant thought as mercilessly as she might swat a hovering gnat. Herding her legions with clapping hands and steely eye, she led them out of the antechamber and off to another pitched battle against her archenemy, disorder. In that hall, beyond the door, dusty banners hung row upon row along the walls, a faded bestiary of fantastic animals. The sun-golden stallion of Clan Mairdon, Naban's gleaming kingfisher crest, owl and ox, otter, unicorn, and cockatrice, rank after rank of silent sleeping creatures. No draught stirred these threadbare hangings. Even the spider web sagged empty and unstitched. Some small change had come to the throne room, though. Something lived once more in the shadowed chamber. Someone was singing a quiet tune in the thin voice of a very young boy or a very old man. At the farthest end of the hall, a massive tapestry hung on the stone wall between the statues of the high kings of the Hayholt, a tapestry bearing the royal coat of arms, the fire drake, and the tree. The grim malachite statues, an honor guard of 6, flanked a huge, heavy chair that seemed entirely carved from yellowing ivory. The chair arms knobbed and knuckled, the back capped with a huge, many-toothed, serpentine skull whose eyes were pools of shadow. It was on and before this chair that 2 figures sat. The small one, clothed in worn motley, was singing. It was his voice that floated up from the foot of the throne, too weak to chip loose even a slight echo. Over him bent a gaunt shape, perched at the edge of the chair like an aged raptor, a tired, hobbled bird of prey shackled to the dull bone. The king, 3 years sick and enfeebled, had returned to his dusty hall. He listened as the small man at his feet sang. The king's long, mottled hands grasped the arms of his great yellowing throne. He was a tall man, once very tall, but now hunched like a monk at prayer. He wore a sagging robe of sky blue and was bearded like a Usirian prophet. A sword lay athwart his lap, shining as though new polished. On his brow sat an iron crown, studded all about with sea-green emeralds and secretive opals. The mannequin at the king's feet paused for a long, silent moment, then began another song. Can the count the raindrops when the sun is high? Can the swim the river when the bad gang try? Can the catch a cloud? Nay, canst not nor I. And the wind a cry, wait, as a passeth by. The wind a cry, wait, as a passeth by. When the tune was finished, the tall old man in the blue robe reached down his hand, and the jester took it. Neither said a word. John the presbyter, lord of Erkenland, and high king of all Ostenard, scourge of the Scythi, and defender of the true faith, wielder of the sword Brightnail, bane of the dragon Shurakai, Prester John was sitting once more upon his chair made of dragon's bones. He was very, very old and had been crying. "Ah, Towser," he breathed at last, his voice deep but flawed with age. "It is surely an unmerciful God who could bring me to this sorry pass." "Perhaps, my lord," the little old man in the checkered jerkin smiled a wrinkled smile. "Perhaps, but doubtless many others would not complain of cruelty if brought to your station in life." "But that is just what I mean, old friend." The king shook his head angrily. "In this shadow age of infirmity, all men are leveled. Any thick-witted tailor's apprentice sups more of life than I." "Ah, la now, my lord, my lord." Towser's grizzled head wagged from side to side, but the bells of his cap, long since clapperless, did not jingle. "My lord, you complain seasonably, but unreasonably. All men come to this pass, great or small. You have had a fine life." Prester John lifted the hilt of Brightnail before him, holding it as though it were a holy tree. He pulled the back of a long, thin hand across his eyes. "Do you know the story of this blade?" he asked. Towser looked up sharply. He had heard the story many times. "Tell me, O king," he said quietly. Prester John smiled, but his eyes never left the leather-bound hilt before him. "A sword, small friend, is the extension of a man's right hand, and the end point of his heart." He lifted the blade up higher so that it caught a glimmer of light from one of the tiny high windows. "Just the same is man, the good right hand of God. Man is the sharp executor of the heart of God. Do you see?" Suddenly he was leaning down, eyes bird bright beneath shaggy brows. "Do you know what this is?" His shaking finger indicated a bit of crimped, rusty metal bound into the sword haft with golden wire. "Tell me, lord." Towser knew perfectly well. "This is the only nail of the true execution tree still remaining in Ostenard." Prester John brought the hilt forward to his lips and kissed it, then held the cool metal against his cheek. "This nail came from the palm of Osiris Adon, our savior. From his hand." The king's eyes, catching for a moment a strange half-light from above, were fiery mirrors. "And there is also the relic, of course," he said after a quiet moment. "The finger bone of martyred Saint Aelstan, the dragon slain. Right here in the hilt." There was another interval of silence, and when Towser looked up, his master was weeping again. Fie on it, John moaned. How can I live up to the honor of God's sword with so much sin, such a weight of it still staining my soul? The arm that once smote the red dragon can now scarce lift a milk cup. Oh, I am dying, my dear Towser, dying. Towser leaned forward, pulling one of the king's bony hands free from the sword grip and kissing it as the old man sobbed. Oh, please, master, the jester beseeched, weep no more. All men must die, you, I, everyone. If we're not killed by youthful stupidity or ill luck, then it is our fate to live on like the trees, older and older until at last we totter and fall. It is the way of all things. How can you fight the Lord's will? But I built this kingdom. A quivering rage was on John the Presbyter as he pulled his hand free from the jester's grasp and brought it sharply down on the arm of his throne. That must weigh against any blot of sin on my soul, however dark. Surely the good Lord will have that in his book of accounts. I dragged these people up from the mud, scourged the cursed sneaking Scythy out of the countryside, gave the peasantry law and justice. The good I have done must weigh strongly. For a moment, John's voice became fainter, as though his thoughts wandered elsewhere. Ah, my old friend, he said at last in a bitter voice, and now I cannot even walk down to the marketplace on Main Row. I must lie in bed or shuffle about this cold castle on the arms of younger men. My kingdom lies corrupting on the vine, while servants whisper and tiptoe outside my bedchamber door, all in sin. The king's words echoed back from the chamber's stone walls and slowly dissipated up among the swirling dust motes. Towser regained John's hand and squeezed it until the king was composed once more. Well, said Prester John after some time had passed, my Elias will rule more firmly than I now can, at least. Seeing the decay of all this, he swept his hand around the throne room. Today I have decided to call him back from Merrimund. He must prepare to take the crown. The king sighed. I suppose I should leave off my womanish weeping and be grateful that I have what many kings have not, a strong son to hold my kingdom together after I am gone. 2 strong sons, Lord. Pfft. The king grimaced. I should call Joshua many things, but I do not believe strong is one of them. You are too hard on him, master. Nonsense. Do you think to instruct me, jester? Do you know the son better than the father does? John's hand trembled, and for a moment it seemed he would struggle to his feet. Finally, the tension slackened. Joshua is a cynic, the king began in a quieter voice. A cynic, a melancholic, cold to his inferiors, and a king's son has nothing but inferiors, each one a potential assassin. No, Towse, he's queer one, my younger, most especially since he lost his hand. How merciful, Aidan. Perhaps the fault is mine. What do you mean, Lord? I should have taken another wife after Rebecca died. It has been a cold house without a queen. Perhaps that caused the boy's odd humors. Elias is not that way, though. There is a certain crude directness to Prince Elias's nature, Towser muttered, but if the king heard, he gave no sign. I thank beneficent God that Elias was firstborn. He has a brave, martial character, that one. I think that if he were the younger, Joshua would not be secure upon the throne. King John shook his head with cold fondness at the thought, then groped down and grasped his jester's ear, tweaking it as if that old worthy were a child of 5 or 6 years. Promise me one thing, Towse. What, Lord? When I die, doubtless soon, I do not think I shall last the winter, you must bring Elias to this room. Do you suppose they will hold the crowning here? Never mind. If they do, then you must wait until it has ended. Bring him here and give him bright nail. Yes, take it now and hold it. I fear that I may die while he is away at Merrimond or some other place, and I wanted to come straight to his hand with my blessing. Do you understand, Towse? With shaking hands, Prester John pushed the sword back into its tooled scabbard and struggled for a moment to unbuckle the baldric on which it hung. The twining was caught, and Towser got up on his knees to work on the knot with his strong old fingers. What is the blessing, my lord? He asked, tongue between teeth, as he picked at the tangle. Tell him what I have told you. Tell him that the sword is the point of his heart and hand, just as we are the instruments of the heart and hand of God the Father. And tell him that no prize, however noble, is worth. John hesitated and drew his trembling fingers to his eyes. No, pay that no mind. Speak only what I told you about the sword. Tell him that. I shall, my king, said Towser. He frowned, although he had solved the knot. I will gladly do your wish. Good. Prester John leaned back once more in his dragonbone chair and closed his gray eyes. Sing for me again, Towse. Towser did. Above, the dusty banners seemed to sway slightly, as if a whisper passed among the crowd of watchers, among the ancient herons and dull-eyed bears and others stranger still. And because we've only got a few minutes left, that's the end of chapter 1. So I think I'll wait and start chapter 2 anew to tomorrow night, or tonight, but it depends on where in the world you are, obviously. Time is my enemy in so many ways. Anyway, so I'm just going to kill a few minutes here and then I'm going to wrap it up. Because also, too, that doing a lot of complicated, especially old or gruff voices is a bit rough on the voice anyway. So, the next chapter is Dr. Morganis. So then he's going to require some voice stuff too. So I'll save my voice for tomorrow. And besides, I like to read the chapter all the way through. One of the things that
I think I've said this before, but I'll just mention it again as a lead-in here, is that the first time I started to write the Dragonbone chair, I was 100 and something pages in, and as I said, I'd never had any editing before. And so I sent it to my editors, who were Betsy Walheim and Sheila Gilbert, and said, this is the first 100 pages of the new book. And they'd already seen an outline, and I've told that story many times. My 125 page, one volume outline, because I thought I'd do it all in one novel, but anyway. And they said, basically, you know, this sounds more like Tolkien than like you. And I realized they were right, that I had not, I was doing not necessarily just Tolkien, but the more traditional, slightly distanced narrator, not necessarily omniscient, but somebody who's a narrative presence that was, hello, Kitty, that was detached from the storyline and was telling the story from outside of it. Which always, you know, it's a particular way of doing things. And sometimes the narrator is like a friend of the reader, or sometimes the narrator is kind of like a trickster. But whatever the case is, the narrator is something separate from the story itself. And I realized that they were right, and that at some level I had kind of adopted this sort of, for lack of a better term, I'll say Tolkienian, because that was the style in which he wrote The Lord of the Rings. Whereas in The Hobbit, for instance, the narrator is much less distanced and is much more kind of like your old uncle, giving you an elbow every now and then, saying, "Isn't this funny?" or "Wasn't that a surprise?" But in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's narration, or his overall storytelling, is slightly distanced. So I went into the whole thing thinking, okay, how can I make this more like me, or more, you know, my own thing? And one of the things that I decided was, you know, well, I briefly experimented in Tail Chaser's Song with telling the story from an outside point of view. It was only like a single chapter, but, you know, it was the only way I could tell this one particular part of the story where the main character wasn't there. And I had always been slightly troubled by that, because it didn't feel quite neat, tidy to me to have 28, 32 or whatever chapters with the focal point character being the protagonist, and then one or two chapters where it's not that way. Just seemed odd. But anyway, so as I was thinking about this, though, I was also realizing that, hang on, I'm planning to take this story and it's going to expand to the point where this is going to be like The Lord of the Rings, or like any number of other big, you know, the Iliad or whatever. It's going to be a big kind of world-shaking, catastrophic time going on. And therefore, I want to be able to give a feeling of how big it is. And I can't really do that if everything has to happen to the main character. Maybe I can, but it's not, it's more, it would be more difficult than I would want, and I would be sacrificing something if I tried to use a single character to tell the whole story. So I began to think about experimenting with multiple character viewpoints. And really, by the middle of the Dragonbone chair, that becomes the mode that I have then kind of kept going in all my multi-volume stories ever since. The kind of kaleidoscope effect of having the story broken up and told from many different points of view, including unsympathetic characters in some cases. But because of that, getting a much wider view. So that was something that editing immediately helped me with back when I was starting, you know, that they said, this doesn't feel like it's you talking. This feels like you're being somebody else, you know, the kind of traditional narrator. And I realized that they were absolutely right. Now, next time I'll talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that I noticed and have thought about in the early parts of the Dragonbone chair. But for now, I'm going to wrap it up. I am going to say thank you so much. I appreciate your joining me. All of you that I didn't get a chance to say hello to. I see Kella, and Kella showed up. And let me see if I can get anybody else here that I might have missed.
We already said hello to Michiel and Ulf. So I think I got everybody who posted online. But anyway, so lovely to see you all and be back with you. I will be reading the second chapter at 7 p.m. And then I'll be back here this time next week. Probably still reading Dragonbone Chair until I figure out what else is going on. So with that, I say thank you for sticking with me and for coming back. And I will see you next week. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors, and just people you see on the street who look like they need help, because a lot of people do right at the moment. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Peace. Good night.